Well, first of all, I'm aware, although I couldn't rattle off the company names, of many different Canadian, New Zealand companies, particularly in the IT area, working together. They're generally small companies. My son is actively involved as an investment banker in one rather more significant deal between a very important Canadian company. I think it's commercially confidential, so I won't go into the details on it. So there's a natural affinity there, but this rests on the foundations of our common culture. I mean, to give you a little anecdote, I always remember having a discussion with Pascal Lamy, the former EU Trade Commissioner and then Director General of the WTO in 2005 to 2008, I think it was. So he said to me, Tim, if there were two countries, putting geography and other political considerations aside, that would fit most easily into the European Union, it would be Canada and New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And I would try and, deconstruct his comment. I just think it's self-evident. And it speaks to my underlying point that I made, Tony, at the beginning of this, that because of our common historical origins and also a shared commitment on the issue of Indigenous people, right, doing something about the past wrongs that our predecessors have inflicted on them. I'll tell you a little story on that in a minute. There is this enormous commonality. Canada's just like, 10 New Zealands, basically. And sometimes many New Zealanders feel that although we're still obviously extremely close to our Australian cousins, the underlying character of Canada and New Zealand are actually closer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, having a larger cousin, as we do with the United States, does have an impact on your psychology as well, for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned Indigenous, so maybe this is an appropriate time because obviously Canada is trying to confront and overcome its past relationship with Indigenous peoples, have a better one. Maybe tell us a little bit about the New Zealand story that way.
Well, the New Zealand story is that the English colonists who arrived in this quite large country. New Zealand is not small. It is around the size of, it's about 10% bigger than the United Kingdom, and only 5 million people. And when the English arrived, other than the whalers and the fur traders and so on, arrived in numbers, I think the population of New Zealand would have only been, 150,000 people who migrated from, we now know for certain it was not from Latin America, the indigenous Māori people. We know from DNA testing going back 30 years that they were part of a long migration, starting actually amongst the Taiwanese hill tribes and going through the Indonesian, Malaysian archipelago until they got to Hawaii, the Cook Islands, New Zealand Aotearoa is the Māori name for New Zealand, and Samoa. So that's their ethnic origins, and there are common language links. I speak Indonesian, well, I used to, and I can understand probably more Māori through my Indonesian, which has got strong linguistic linkages going back all these centuries than I can through my own New Zealand experiences. Now, when they arrived, it was the last major colonization by the English. And they had seen the disasters, strongly influenced by the church. They had seen the disasters that occurred in previous colonization and tried to do something to prevent the same disaster for the Indigenous people in this new colony, which was originally administered out of New South Wales by the British. So they signed a treaty called the Treaty of Waitangi. Waitangi is a place in the beautiful North Island of New Zealand, which guaranteed the chiefs representing the various tribes their lands, rivers, and rights. And that continues to be a very important part of the political debate in New Zealand, becoming more and more and more important. And I remember when I was New Zealand chief negotiator in the last successful multilateral trade round, the Uruguay round, that I put in the first reservation about the Treaty of Waitangi into a trade agreement than anyone ever had done. And that basically said nothing in this agreement should prevent a future
Right.
New Zealand government from implementing its obligations via the Treaty of Waitangi.